Welcome to our broadcast. First of all, I want to introduce our guest, who is Igor Tuveri, one of the most important graphic novelists in Italy, who works under the pen name Igorт. And his books are translated in English, French, Japanese, Russian, Spanish, German, and other languages. His work is really important, and today we are talking about a particular work about Holodomor. And the book is called Quaderni Ucraini, and in English it was translated English, the Ukrainian and Russian notebooks, Life and Death under Soviet Rule. And it was published in 2016. So, hi Igor, and welcome to Contact Next Generation. I would like to ask you, why did you decide to publish a book about Holodomor, and what sources did you find about this subject?
So, first of all, my real name is Igor. So my parents were very much close and attracted by Eastern culture, Russian culture in general. My father was a composer, and I've grown up listening to the stories of the famous Russian literature, even before I was able to read them, to read the book directly. So I decided at first, left to Ukraine to realize a book, to write and draw a book about Anton Chekhov, since his most and his houses, his very famous Bielaya Dacha was in Yalta, in Crimea, that was Ukrainian until some very few years ago. And so the first step to go to Ukraine was this one. And, you know, when you work with comics, with literature in general, you have a privilege, which is the privilege of misery. I mean that these kind of books are not expensive at all. It only depends on you and your talent and your skill to write and draw. I am a movie director too, and this kind of freedom that gives you the very, very low cost of producing a book, it's impossible in cinema. So with this kind of freedom, when I went to Ukraine, I was very impressed by the life and the beauty of these people, and the sadness, a certain chagrin, as the French used to say, that was all around me. And so I decided to take my time. And little by little in my head was growing up the idea to talk with these people, to try to interview them, and to try to understand how did they live during the years of Soviet Union. It was 2008, and it was the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the Iron Curtain that divided East from West, no? And thinking about this and thinking that I was living in a very strange place for me, European, used to any kind of luxury, etc. And I was very touched by the very strong dignity of these people. I started to establish myself there. First of all, I don't like to live in hotels, even if it comes very often for my work, but I prefer to rent an apartment and to try to have everyday life as people, if I want to understand the place in which I'm living, that period of my life, I have to live as everybody else, not in a kind of artificial hotel life. No, so I started to live there for a while, and with an interpreter, I prepared a list of questions that were supposed to create a kind of dialogue in which it was impossible to answer yes or no, but the questions were conceived in a way to create a storytelling in a way. And my idea was to bring out the language of comics from the studio, to put it in real life, in the streets. And the people that I was choosing were people in which, if I was a cartographer, I could understand from the faces kind of life and pains and happiness that they have had. And so I started to asking, and little by little, it was clear that these people were not only witnesses, but in a lot of cases, they were the survivals from what I started to study. It was Holodomor. So my idea was that to understand the history, you make you have to pass through the point of view of everybody's life, not from heroes. I'm not interested very much in heroes. I am much more interested in common people. I am not a journalist, I am a storyteller. So for me, the human being is the biggest treasure we can find to tell a story. Heroes are good for media, are good for propaganda. And my work was exactly the opposite. My intention was to try to detect, to understand how has been their life. And when I started working on this, the topic of Holodomor was very difficult. It was frightening for a lot of people. And some of them, they sent me away. They refused to talk, and they were still in terror. They ask me, sometimes they ask him, who are you? Who do you send you? And for whom are you working? And it was even difficult to explain that what I wanted realize was a graphic novel, because there is no tradition of graphic novel or comics in former Soviet Union countries. So they first thought, sometimes I remember they thought I wanted to tell a story about like a fairy tale, but with Holodomor. So it was very strange conception. And so I stopped saying that I had to draw, and just told them I was a novelist. And little by little, I started to collect stories and to record them with a video camera, to be able to draw people, faces, and attitudes, posture or way of moving the head, or the way in which they were dressed. And it was a very strong experience that finally kept me there for something around 2 years, in which I little by little start, I think, to understand better what Ukrainian culture was, and what the attitude of these people has been and was how they were living in a way. It was not that simple. It was a very painful experience because we were dealing about something not easy even to imagine. And there has been a lot of objection and resistance, even in Europe, because they thought that my work could be easily used by the right wing against communism, etc. But we had a kind of genocide, from 6 to 10 million people dead. We don't know exactly how much because the NKVD or other OGPU, they were destroying all the register of birth and death to avoid to try to understand exactly. And that was very, very strong. And I was not sure of what result could I have had in my country, in Europe, or for instance, it's not translated in Ukraine, the book. They have tried several times, but it's not translated yet. And I don't want to translate it in Russia since they can manipulate it. But for me, it was very strong connection with this kind of people, and that I think I love. I mean, it's people that touched my heart deeply, and I have seen things and the kind of life and difficulty in life that I had never seen before. So for me, it was a very touching. I cannot even say work because it was this kind of work. It's a privilege, you are there and you are there and you record stories, and after you spend your time to try to rebuild this kind of stories. So I barely can consider mine as a work, but I think it has been very important in my life, not only in my career, in my whole life.
I would like to ask you, did you live these for those 2 years in Dnipro, right?
I lived for a little while in Kiev, and I went back very, very often to Kiev, even because I had to get out from. I had an apartment in Dnipropetrovsk and in Kiev, and after I went to see the country, and I was living like in another century because the Izba in the country are like the shower was in the yard, in country yard, and so and there was no hot water. It was like to live 1 century before, and it has been very strong. I travel a lot, and finally after almost 2 years, I went to Crimea, and I visited all the places, Chekhov's places. The book about Chekhov has never been realized yet, but all the documentation, all the shootings, all the documents that I needed to find, I have taken. I mean, and but for me, it was more a way to live there and to. I have a lot of friends. And a lot of stories come from these people that I know, even the last ones after there was the invasion of the Russian troops.
Exactly.
Guys, no, that officially were not Russian, but they
exactly.
were.
Yeah, you added this material after So
yes, in a new edition. The book has been printed a lot of times and is still available in the last edition. And it was even included with the newspaper, with the Il Corriere della Sera.
One of the most important Italian newspapers, right?
Yes. And one of the most ancient too, and it was it has given to me even a strong relationship with people that I did not know before, that just read the book and after wrote me and get in touch with me in the bookstores when I was trying to having a panel in which I was telling about my experience, and even some not nice connections with people that was against this book. And so I received a lot of letters which were not very nice, in which they were they wanted to beat me or to have a fight with me in a way.
Oh, so you are threatened?
Yes, it happened. It happened. I'm used of it and I don't care. But I mean, it happened. And at the beginning was very strange because I was not used. I mean, when I make a panel in a bookstores or in a museum, if you don't like my book, you don't come. In this case, they came just to...
I could be wrong, but I think that in Italy, we have this mentality about communism that it's not so... we think that communism is utopia, and we see it only like a good thing, no? Maybe it's because of our Italian history and our right politicians used to use some stories and some facts of history for their achievements. And so I think that also this kind of work leads to this appropriation and exploitation also.
Yes. But you know, when I was before I went there, you know, Italian Communist Party has been in a way much more independent, especially when Enrico Berlinguer arrived, which was a great leader of the Communist Party, and he decided to cut relationships in a way to not to be the direct line for the Russian Soviet Communist Party. And so that's why we think communism is in Italy. It has been not as violent and not brutal and not repressive as it was in Russia. But all this became very, very evident once that talking with a friend, a woman from Moldavia. I told her that I was communist, and she stopped me and told me, "You don't know what you are saying." And that answer started put me a question: do I really know what does it mean to be a communist or to have communist sympathies? I mean, it's and so that's why I started asking, how did they live during the communist, the 60 years or 70 years of communism in Russia? And it has been a very strong experience and very teaching experience, since I understood that our idea was pretty abstract and
Yes.
distant from real life. The repression, even the idea that Lenin was the good one and Stalin was the bad one, is totally fake and I mean totally superficial in a way. I mean, it's kind of reality too much simple. Reality is much more complex, is much more different. And to live in Ukraine has been a very interesting experience, even to understand and realize what was happening.
Yes, I agree with you. And I would like to ask you if you think that in the future we could change this mentality and we could be more objective about history of other countries, of countries that faced the real communism in this case.
It depends very much from people. I mean, and in this period, I notice that there is a very strong attitude to manipulate reality. It's much more what is called in Russian disinformatia. Now it became a reality. Is much more common now than before, because before there was not so much information circulating and you had to look for it. Now information comes over yourself, and you have to distinguish, start to understand what is real, what is fake, which are the sources, how they are introduced to you, and how they are published, and what they cut, what they did not cut, etc. So now, if you want, I think it's even more complex than before. But I think that we have the tools, in a way, to try to read correctly and to understand better, maybe, things. Now it's possible to find books in every language, and you can, if you're smart and quick, you can read different versions. And I think that for this reason, nowadays we are living in a very interesting era, very interesting period. And even for my language, the books have been published several times, even in other countries, like France, for instance, in which they were used in school.
Yeah.
To teach about modern history, what has been a very difficult period of our age, in which there was the possibility to close the frontiers and literally condemn to death for starvation a whole people, just because Ukraine was very useful for its land, for all the natural resources of the country, and that was used by Stalin to create a modernization of the Soviet Union, but it cost a lot of lives.
You pointed out an important topic, the use in schools, because I think that some works like this one, like Quaderni Ucraini, and another important work about a genocide, in this case we are talking about genocide, is the work by Art Spiegelman, Mouse. And I think that this kind of work, maybe I'm wrong, but should I call it graphic journalism? Also, it's a form of graphic journalism, can be an instrument to spread the knowledge to maybe people from people who do not know anything about some kind of histories, about some kind of stories, and also maybe students and children.
The idea that comics are easy to read can be used as a real tool by professors, by teachers, because students read them without any big effort. It's kind of a natural language for young people. And I think that's one of the most important possibilities to talk. You know, I'm a friend talking about graphic journalism. I am a friend of Joe Sacco. Joe Sacco is the graphic novelist, the graphic journalist that told about Palestine, and a lot of his books are concerned about even very, very specific historical events about Palestine. And he told me once, you know, Igor, if I have printed, I would have printed my book just as an essay, since he's a real journalist. The book who would have been interested, I don't know, 300 people, 300 professors that were really studying this particular event in the Palestinian conflict. But since it's drawn and told as a graphic novel, it was spread everywhere in a lot of countries and sold very well to people that like to read because they're beautiful, they're easy to read, etc. And Spiegelman is a dear friend. We know each other since almost 40 years. And to use this language to talk about particular and personal stories, it has always been a good way to approach history. As I was mentioning before, I think the best way to understand history is to watch from the lower side, not watching the heroes and dreaming of their life, adventure life, etc., but to watch the common people. I love common people, and I consider myself part of common people, and so I sometimes I find myself I find myself reflecting how would I have lived in this occasion, because it's easy to think in a cinematic way, but we have to think in what does it mean for common people when you cannot even talk about the fact that part of your family has been deported, or that it's impossible to tell that you are a religious person, for instance, because at that time religion was the opium of people. No, Stalin used to say this. And how was life if I could not travel? And people were starving and dying in the streets, and Europe knew it because there were less letters from the Italian ambassador that was reporting point by point what was really happening. And there was bread made with pieces of wood, because they did not have il grano, no? What is needed to make a real bread. And all this was very difficult. I remember that with my interpreter, we were looking for documents in Cyrillic, and there was almost nothing. It was in 2008 impossible to find. She was surprised to see how many documents I could find in English or French or Italian. And while she was Ukrainian, and she's Ukrainian, and she was looking in Ukrainian and Russian, and she could not find almost nothing. And that was a very good lesson. And one thing that is included in the book are the official reports of the police, Russian, Soviet police, NKVD, GPU, in this time. And they come from Canada, from the Ukrainian community of Canada. They were published in the web by the Ukrainian community. It was very, very helpful, because I was going to put together the version of the survival of that specific period and the official reports telling from the Soviet point of view what has been. And it was very cynical, the report. People were numbers, and very touching, I think, very human. The reports, the stories, that what did they live? They were children, and they were seeing their friends' children dead, and the children disappeared, and the country, little by little, was becoming just to export. The result of the work was just to export, and they were starving. I mean, it was terrifying.
Canadian resources are really important. I also looked at them when I were working on my essay for university, because also the University of Toronto has a big site of resources about Holodomor. I would like to ask you a last question. I think that there are some people that are not used to read graphic novels and comics, and maybe they would point that a work about history written and illustrated in a graphic novel is it's not true, because it's a subjective point of view. What would you answer to a critic like this one?
Oh yes, but this is a very naive objection. I mean, it's when there is a writer, there is a subjectivity. Who tells that the literature is objective? It's impossible to say this. I mean, when there is a point of view, there is a subjectivity. My point was try to understand how to tell in the most naked and honest possible way what I was recording. I remember that when we interviewed Nikolai Vasilievich was in the market, and he didn't want to be interviewed, but for me it was very interesting. So he sent us, he delayed and said, come back in 2 hours, and after 2 hours, come back in another 2 hours. So we waited something like a whole day. to be able to talk with him. And when we started talking with him, I went away not to contaminate the witnesses. So there was an Ukrainian talking with another Ukrainian, and we were recording, and I was far away filming to be able to portray him. And he started shaking, and after crying in the middle of a market with people passing through and watching him and trying to understand what was happening. And so it was very touching, very, very strong experience. And once we have written, translated, transposed in the paper all the sentences that it was saying, I started to storyboard to recreate this kind of rhythm. And it didn't work. I didn't know why, but you know, the travel from reality, from real life to the paper was something that was changing. So I asked to the translator to retranslate from zero the same interview, and I noticed that it was exactly translated because the two versions were exactly the same sentence and the same sense. So she must not interpret anything. It was working. And I had to work adding some pauses, some silences to recreate that kind of tension and emotion that the man was having. And even if you are filming a person, this is an interpretation, because the reality is in 3D, and you can see all things that when you are shooting, you just see a part, no, a portion of the reality. It's only question of attitude, how honest you are, or how really, which is the aim. In this case, my aim was try to give voice to people that normally have no voice, people that have not the right to speak, or nobody is listening. I was using my little credibility to point a spot and to say, listen, these people has lived this. And you know, now it's more than 12 years that I don't publish books, fiction, I mean, in which the storytelling is fictional. And it has been a very strong even discovery for me. I mean, it's something that I was not expected to see from myself, but it has been very interesting and very positive experience. Now I am going back and writing fiction, but really it's almost 15 years that I'm not publishing books about fictional books, I mean. And so the experience has been so strong that even after telling about Japan and about Russia, I have done several books in which all this approach, like a reportage, a graphic reportage, was the way to tell.
Thank you so much for this interview.
Thanks to you.